The United States is about to do something it has never done before. Host the biggest sporting event on the planet, with its own team stepping out in front of home crowds, carrying the weight of an entire nation's expectations. But to understand just how big a moment this really is, you need to understand where this team has come from. Because the story of the USA at the World Cup is honestly one of the wildest journeys in international football. There's a third-place finish in the very first tournament ever played. There's one of the biggest shocks in football history. There's a 40-year disappearance from the world stage. And there's a modern era full of heartbreak, near misses, and flashes of brilliance. So before the USA kicks off their 2026 campaign, let's go through the entire history. Every World Cup, every story, right up to today. It all begins in 1930. Uruguay, the very first World Cup ever held. Only 13 teams competed, and the United States was one of them. And here's the thing most people don't realize: the USA actually had a really strong squad that year. Several of their players were former British professionals who had moved to America to play in the American Soccer League, which at the time was a surprisingly competitive league. The USA beat Belgium 3-0, then beat Paraguay 3-0 as well, and that Paraguay game is actually where Bert Patenaude scored what is recognized as the first hat trick in World Cup history. An American, at the very first World Cup ever played. That win sent the USA through to the semifinals, where they ran into Argentina and lost 6-1. But because of how the tournament was structured, that semi-final finish was later recognized by FIFA as a third-place finish overall. Third place at the first ever World Cup. It remains to this day the best finish in USA men's soccer history. Then came 1934 in Italy. The format was different this time, straight knockout from the very first game. The USA faced the host nation Italy in the very first round, and they lost 7-1. Tournament over after a single match. Brutal way to go out, but at least they were there. And then, nothing. For 40 years, the United States simply did not exist on the World Cup stage. No qualification, no appearances. Soccer in America during this period was, frankly, an afterthought. While the rest of the world was building football culture, the USA was focused on other sports, and the national team became something of a forgotten project. That drought finally ended in 1950, in Brazil, and this tournament gave us one of the most famous results in the entire history of the sport. The USA were massive underdogs going into their group game against England. England at this point were one of the most respected footballing nations on the planet, the country that invented the modern game. The American squad, by contrast, were part-timers, postmen, factory workers, a teacher. Their goalkeeper drove hearses for a living. Nobody gave the USA a chance. Some journalists didn't even travel to cover the game because they assumed the result would be a formality. And then, 37 minutes in, an American forward named Joe Gaetjens flung himself at a cross and somehow directed it past the English goalkeeper. 1-0. England pushed and pushed but couldn't find an equalizer. The USA held on. 1-0. The United States had beaten England at the World Cup. When the result was telegraphed back to England, newspaper editors assumed it was a typo and actually printed it as 10-1 to England, because the real scoreline seemed impossible. It's still considered one of the greatest upsets in football history. But despite that incredible win, the USA were eliminated in the group stage anyway, and then the wilderness years returned. After 1950, the USA didn't qualify for another World Cup for 40 years. 40 years. An entire generation of Americans grew up with no World Cup team to support. Soccer in the country was basically dormant at the international level. That long, painful drought finally ended in 1990, in Italy, and the story of how they got there is legendary in American soccer circles. The USA needed a result against Trinidad and Tobago in their final qualifier, and Paul Caligiuri scored what's now known as the shot heard round the world, a stunning long-range goal that sent the USA back to the World Cup for the first time since 1950. But Italy 1990 itself was tough. The USA lost to Czechoslovakia 5-1, lost to host nation Italy 1-0, and lost to Austria 2-1. 3 defeats, last place in their group. It wasn't pretty, but they were back. And being back mattered enormously for the growth of the sport in America. Then came 1994. And this one is special, because the United States hosted the World Cup for the first time. Home advantage, a country falling in love with the sport in real time, and a USA team that finally delivered. They drew Switzerland 1-1, then beat Colombia 2-1 in one of the biggest results of their modern history, then lost narrowly to Romania. That was enough to advance to the round of 16, the first time the USA had gotten out of the group stage in 64 years. In the round of 16, they faced the eventual champions, Brazil. And they actually held Brazil scoreless until the 72nd minute, before a goal from Bebeto sent them out 1-0. A heartbreaking way to exit, but the USA left that tournament with their reputation transformed. The home World Cup had worked. Soccer in America would never be the same again. 1998 in France was a different story entirely. The USA were drawn into a brutal group with Germany, Iran, and Yugoslavia. They lost to Germany 2-0, then suffered a painful loss to Iran 1-2 in a politically charged match that captured headlines around the world, and then lost to Yugoslavia as well. 3 defeats, last place in the entire tournament. A genuinely difficult World Cup for the program. But then came 2002. And this is the tournament a lot of people consider the best in USA World Cup history. In South Korea and Japan, the USA topped a group containing Portugal, beating them 3-2 in one of the most famous results in team history. They then drew with South Korea and lost narrowly to Poland, but it was enough to advance. In the round of 16, they faced their fierce rivals Mexico and won 2-0, sending them through to the quarterfinals for the first time in the modern era. In the quarterfinals, they faced Germany and pushed them all the way, eventually losing 1-0 to the team that would go on to reach the final. Quarterfinals. The best modern era finish in USA World Cup history, and a tournament that announced the United States as a team that could genuinely compete with the best in the world. 2006, in Germany, was a step backwards. The USA were drawn into a tough group with Czech Republic, Italy, and Ghana. They lost to Czech Republic 3-0, drew with Italy, and then lost to Ghana 2-1. Eliminated in the group stage. A disappointing tournament after the heights of 2002. Then came 2010 in South Africa. And this tournament gave us one of the most iconic moments in USMNT history. In their final group game against Algeria, the USA desperately needed a win to advance. The score was 0-0 deep into the second half, with the USA having had multiple goals controversially disallowed earlier in the tournament. And then, in the final minute of the match, Landon Donovan scored arguably the most famous goal in USMNT history, a dramatic last-gasp winner that sent the USA through to the round of 16 and sparked scenes of pure delirium across the entire country. In the round of 16, they faced Ghana and lost 2-1 in extra time. Heartbreaking. But the Donovan goal against Algeria remains one of the defining moments in the sport's history in America. 2014 in Brazil might be the tournament most fans remember best. The USA were drawn into what was immediately nicknamed the Group of Death: Ghana, Portugal, and Germany. They beat Ghana 2-1, drew an absolutely thrilling game with Portugal 2-2, and lost to Germany 1-0. Somehow, that was enough to advance to the round of 16. There they faced Belgium, and this is the game everyone remembers for one reason. Goalkeeper Tim Howard. He made 16 saves in that match, a World Cup record that still stands today in a heroic performance that couldn't quite prevent a 2-1 extra time defeat. The USA were out, but Tim Howard's performance became a genuine cultural moment in America. He was trending worldwide. People were editing him into historical paintings. It was that big. And then disaster. 2018, the USA failed to qualify for the World Cup in Russia entirely. the first time they'd missed a World Cup since 1986. It was a massive shock to American soccer and led to a complete overhaul of the program, eventually bringing in a new generation of young players. That new generation arrived at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, led by Christian Pulisic and Weston McKennie. The USA drew with Wales, then played out a famous goalless draw with England, then beat Iran 1-0 in an emotionally charged final group game to advance to the round of 16. There they faced the Netherlands and lost 3-1, ending their tournament. But the performances showed real promise, a young, talented USA team that looked ready to take the next step. And that brings us to now. 2026, the United States, co-hosting the World Cup for the first time since 1994. With home advantage, a talented young squad led by Pulisic, Adams, and McKennie, and 90,000 fans roaring them on at SoFi Stadium. 12 appearances, one third-place finish at the very first tournament ever played. One of the greatest upsets in football history against England. 40 years in the wilderness twice, a heroic last-minute goal against Algeria, a record-breaking goalkeeping performance against Belgium, and 4 trips to the round of 16 in the modern era, but never further. The question now is simple. With the whole world watching, on home soil, can this USA team finally go further than ever before? Let me know in the comments, how far do you think the USA goes in this tournament? If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more World Cup 2026 content. We're covering every match, every storyline, all summer long. See you in the next one.